Calisthenics. You may have seen it everywhere. It was used in the Olympics. You may have used it as a kid. You may have been playing on monkey bars, climbing on things, jumping off, doing flips. It's used virtually everywhere. And you may not know that. Today, my goal is to tell you almost everything that you've ever wanted to know about this sport. To start things off, let's talk about the history of calisthenics. Where did this sport come from? Is it a new sport? Is it an old sport? The truth is that it's actually been used by people for thousands of years. In fact, one of the earliest recordings of this sport was by ancient Greeks themselves. And around 480 BC, the historian Herodotus wrote that he saw Spartans use calisthenics in their training to get better and stronger for war. And as we all have known, or maybe not have known, the Spartans were actually a fierce and brutal warrior race in ancient Greece. Fast forward to the gladiator period of Romans, they used calisthenics in their training as well to get stronger in the arena. Shaolin monks even in the ancient times would use calisthenics in crazy push-up variations like push-ups with their index fingers and all of that amazing yet very difficult stuff to perform. While calisthenics was very prevalent during the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, when the Catholics took over during the medieval period, it wasn't as practiced. You see, the Catholics valued their spiritual lives over their physical well-being. That's why their sense of hygiene and all of that wasn't as good as the Greeks and Romans, and especially their sports. It was only practiced by the nobles. That's not to say it didn't exist at all, as one of the earliest Roman emperors, Vasily I, he was a notable and strong wrestler, and wrestling is a calisthenics activity. After the medieval period, the Renaissance period came about. During this time, people were more interested in the Greek way of life and their culture. They were very interested in the human aesthetics and beauty. That's where calisthenics made its comeback. One notable Italian physician by the name of Mercurialis contributed greatly to calisthenics by writing what is called, or known, the first book of sports medicine, titled De Arte Gymnastica. Fast forward to the year 1810, there arose a man by the name of Friedrich John. This man is considered by many to be the father of gymnastics. He taught calisthenics and gymnastics to young men in the area, and he helped them to strengthen themselves physically. He was also the inventor of several very prominent calisthenics tools that are still used to this very day, such as the gymnastics rings and the parallel bars. His followers became to be known as turners. In fact, one of them, in 1824, immigrated to America, and his name was Charles Beck. Now, Charles Beck was the first ever opener of America's first ever gymnastics stadium. And through him, calisthenics began to grow and spread all across America and evolve into what it is today. Now, in modern times, calisthenics is not as flashy or popular as weightlifting, because Arnold Schwarzenegger and all the other massive bodybuilders basically took over the sport of fitness. But calisthenics is making its comeback in today's modern world. You see people like the Bar Brothers and various other athletes training calisthenics, doing street workouts. Now that we've covered the history of calisthenics, we have to find out what in the world this sport is useful for. Does it have any uses? Well, as it turns out, calisthenics is very useful for developing one's coordination, balance, mobility, flexibility, and functional strength. And I'll give you examples of all of those. One great example of how calisthenics builds up your coordination is none other than football players. Football players use drills where they sprint through hoops and around cones, in and out, back and forth in all different angles, and that builds up their coordination in their muscles and their bodies and minds, so that when they're actually playing the sport, they can maneuver around the players very easily. Calisthenics is a very, very great way to build up your mobility, flexibility, and balance. One of the best real-world examples of how people use calisthenics to do this are yoga practitioners. Those people bend and contort their bodies into various ways which some people deem very uncomfortable. And they would be right, it is very uncomfortable when you're first starting off, but as you continue practicing yoga and all of the movements, your body becomes more flexible, your joints become more mobile, and you gain more balance. And sooner than later, you'll be able to do a bunch of amazing skill work, such as handstands, planches, and splits. One of the greatest uses of calisthenics, if not the greatest use of calisthenics, is to build up one's own functional strength. What is functional strength, you may ask? Well, functional strength is basically strength-related movements that are similar to real-life movements, such as picking things up, putting things down, running around, climbing things, jumping off of things, that sort of thing. Almost every calisthenics movement will build up your functional strength one way or the other. I'll give you some examples. When you're building up your functional strength, you want to use movements that are very relative to real-life motions. If I'm doing a curl, for example, or a deadlift, you can't really build up any functional strength with that, because the barbell is specifically designed and catered to your hands when you grab it, and so are dumbbells. However, when you're doing a push-up or a pull-up, or you're running, or you're squatting, or you're doing splits, or you're jumping off of things, you're building a lot of functional strength in your wrists and your forearms and your legs to be able to do all of those various types of movements in real life, such as rock climbing, running through forests, and etc., and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, in life, many things have bad aspects to them as well as good aspects, and calisthenics is also one of those things. I'm going to share with you the positive and the negative aspects of calisthenics. The first pro that I'm going to give you about calisthenics is that it's very inexpensive. Unlike gym memberships, some for which you have to pay $15, and depending on which area you live in, it's $169. For calisthenics, you don't have to pay for a gym membership, and you don't have to pay for fancy or expensive equipment. In fact, you can build your own calisthenics home gym for around $200 max. The second pro that I'm going to give to you about calisthenics is that it can be done virtually anytime and anywhere. Literally, anytime and anywhere. You need very, very little equipment to do calisthenics. If you have a floor, you can do calisthenics. Even if you don't have a pull-up bar, you can still do calisthenics. If you have a tree branch that you can hang on to, you can do pull-ups. I've seen people do pull-ups with broomsticks and 2 chairs. I've seen people do dips with broomsticks and 2 chairs. Maybe not the broomstick, but definitely the 2 chairs. I'm one of those people. You can even do calisthenics in your place of work. It's frowned upon, but you can still do it. The third pro about calisthenics that I'm going to give to you is that it's more athletic, or it allows you to be more athletic. How does it do so, you may ask? Well, whenever you're doing any sort of calisthenics movement, which is basically almost all of them, you're performing what's known as compound lifts. You're moving multiple muscle groups and joints at the same time. And whenever you do compound lifts, you're coordinating all of your power from those lifts throughout your entire kinetic chain. And in the long run, this allows you to be a lot more athletic. The fourth pro that I'm going to give to you about calisthenics is that it's very good for conditioning. Many athletes use calisthenics-based exercises in their own conditioning workouts to enhance their own conditioning levels. Burpees and sprints are one very, very good examples of this. When you do a burpee or when you sprint, you're able to control how fast and how explosive you want to be. With regular weight training, that's very, very hard to do. So therefore, this is why calisthenics is very, very useful for building up your own conditioning. Now that I've told you the pros about calisthenics, I need to tell you the cons. The first con being, calisthenics is very problematic when it comes to training with an injury. Calisthenics uses a lot of compound movements, which is great, but not when you have an injury. You see, when you have an injury, it's very smart to isolate the injured area, whether it's the shoulder or the back or the knee, and work around it using smart movements, especially isolation workouts. With calisthenics, this isn't the case, because nearly all of the exercises are compound movements. The second con about calisthenics is that it requires a good amount of coordination and balance to perform some of the advanced and intermediate exercises. That's not to say that beginners can't do it, it's just they can't perform all of the basic movements very well. And for some of them, you do need a good amount of coordination to do, such as the handstand push-up or even the pike push-up, for example. You do need some coordination and balance in order to perform that technique correctly. The third con about calisthenics that I'm going to tell you is that it's very hard to progress, or rather, it's harder to progress than weightlifting. You see, with calisthenics, as covered before, you need a lot of balance and coordination to do some of the advanced movements. And that might not be very beneficial to someone who is overweight, or someone who has an injury, or someone who is just very, very weak to begin with. With weights, it's very, very easy because you don't need a lot of balance and coordination to do some of those exercises. All you need to do to progress with weights is to just simply add more weight to the bar. With calisthenics, you have to move your body and leverage it to make the exercises harder. When it comes to comparing calisthenics and weightlifting, people often think that they're two very separate things. And for some parts, they're right, but from others, they're not. For example, when someone thinks of calisthenics, they think of gymnastics athletes, such as in the Olympics. And when they think of weightlifting, they think of your bodybuilders, such as Arnold Schwarzenegger. And therefore, people get misconceptions about the two types of training and think they're completely separate from one another. But I'm here to tell you that the differences between weightlifting and calisthenics are actually very minor. Now to get to the similarities between calisthenics and weightlifting. The first similarity that I'm going to give to you is that both calisthenics and weightlifting are able to help you burn a large amount of body fat, because both forms of training induce a large calorie burn through high-intensity compound movements. You burn the most calories by doing high-intensity heavy compound movements and by doing them for a long duration of time. And you can do those things in both calisthenics and weightlifting. The second similarity between calisthenics and weightlifting, and this one may surprise some people, and some people may even get angry at this one, but it's the truth nonetheless. And that similarity is that both forms of training can allow you to get big and strong muscles. How can that be, you may ask? Push-ups can't get you big. Pull-ups can't get you big. Yes, they absolutely can. You have to understand how the muscle is built. The muscle is built by tension. Tension floods the muscle and it breaks apart the muscle fibers within whatever muscle you're training, whether it's a bicep, tricep, shoulder, you name it. In order to increase that tear, you need to increase the tension. And your body doesn't know whether it's pushing up a barbell or it's pushing up your body. All it knows is that there's tension in my muscles. And the more tension you put in there for a longer duration of time, the more your muscles will grow, because the more tears you'll create and the more your body will repair them. And if you continue to use that process through a process called progressive overload, you're going to be building muscle and strength in no time. And both forms of training allow you to do this sort of thing. There's absolutely no difference. The third similarity between weightlifting and calisthenics is that both of them can give you a very good conditioning workout, as well as your strengthening workouts. We've already covered that calisthenics are good for conditioning, but weightlifting can also be very good for conditioning as well. For example, the heavy squat. If you squat really heavy, yes, you are activating your anaerobic system and you are building your muscle and working each specific muscle of the legs out, your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes. But after each set, your heart should be pounding very, very hard. And that in turn will increase your cardiovascular capacity. Now that I've covered the similarities between calisthenics and weightlifting, I need to tell you the major differences. The first being, calisthenics requires a lot more coordination and balance to perform the exercise. Now I've mentioned that before, but I want to compare it to how weightlifting doesn't require a lot of coordination and balance to perform their exercise. If you're doing a handstand push-up or even a pistol squat, which is a one-legged squat, you need a lot of balance and coordination in order to perform those movements safely and correctly. With calisthenics, if you were to do an overhead press, for example, you can do it seated down. You can do it in a very controlled area. You can have bars that assist you if you ever were to drop the weight. So it's very, very controlled and easy to do and safe. The second difference between weightlifting and calisthenics is that calisthenics is very limited in its progression with your own body weight. What do I mean by that? I mean that you can only get so far with your own body weight. Later on, when you're doing very advanced calisthenics movements, such as the one-legged squat, or the one-arm push-up and pull-up, and even the one-arm handstand push-up. You're more training your balance and coordination than inducing muscle growth and strength. Now, that's not to say that you can't get stronger with more of those movements, but it's going to be very slow and very hard. With weightlifting, it's much, much more efficient and much easy. How do you get stronger and progress with weightlifting? You just slap more weight to the bar and you keep repping it out and improving until you can't improve no more. That's when steroids come in handy. The last and probably the greatest difference between both calisthenics and weightlifting is that calisthenics are much easier on your joints than weightlifting itself. You see, with calisthenics, the load on your joints is only your body weight. And when you get stronger, your joints won't be in jeopardy. In fact, a study by a few researchers stated that some female gymnasts, after 27 weeks of gymnastics training, had much more bone mineral density than some of the others in the control group. With weightlifting, this is not the case, unfortunately, because you can put on hundreds and hundreds of pounds on the bar, whether you're bench pressing or you're squatting or you're deadlifting. And even though you might lift with proper form and good technique, over time, your joints will start to deteriorate, which is why most powerlifters have to retire early. And you're not seeing them lift a horribly massive amount of weight in their later years in life. And with calisthenics, you can do that till before you die even. Now that I've covered the uses, the benefits, the pros and the cons, and the differences between calisthenics and weightlifting, I want to help you figure out if calisthenics is right for you. The first question that I'd like to ask you is, what is your financial situation right now? Are you able to afford a gym? If you can afford a gym, then I'd like to ask you the second question. If you've answered yes to the financial stability, then I have to ask you about your desire to lift weights. Do you want to lift weights? Are you willing to drive to the gym to lift those weights on a daily basis? Are you willing to spend money on a gym month to month? If all of those questions interest you, and if you said yes to all of them, then I would highly recommend the gym as your form of training. Maybe you've answered yes for the financial stability, but maybe you don't like lifting weights. Maybe you find that boring. Maybe you don't want to go to the gym consistently every single day. Maybe that just doesn't interest you. Maybe you want a program or a workout routine or a style of training that will help you become more flexible, coordinated, and build functional strength at the same time. If that's the case, then I would recommend calisthenics. Ultimately, your results are produced from consistency and hard work. Whatever method of training you choose, you should enjoy it. Because if you enjoy it, you'll be able to do it consistently year to year. And therefore, you'll produce physical and mental gains year-round.